the imbalances in the current system of content distribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chavern. We'll now begin questioning under the 5-minute rule, and I'll begin by recognizing myself. Ms. Hardaway, Ms. Richardson, thank you very much for your testimony. I'm sorry you've been through the experience you've been through. Are you aware of other people on the internet, conservatives, liberals, anybody, who've also been censored by social media?
Well, we're looking at people like Governor Sarah Palin, just a lot of people that's been censored.
Yes, even down to the President of the United States is being censored as well, with him having over 23 million people on his platform, unable to garner 1 million views on a video within an hour. Before the censoring, he was able to do that. Now he can't do that. So yeah, there's a lot of conservative voices that are being censored.
Do any of your friends or family or fans reach out to you when they tried to view your content but couldn't?
Oh, absolutely. We get tons of either emails. Go down the side of our Facebook page on our post. Okay, you all did not show up in my news feed. I can't find you all. Or I put you in search. I couldn't find you all. It took me a long time to find you all. You all are not coming up.
We also put out a video where somebody made a video where they tried to follow our page. And the way that Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook have their settings set, you can click on follow, but it defaults back to just standard. It wouldn't let people stay on follow. And then whenever they come, whenever you click on follow to follow our page, for some people that was able to do so, they did not get a notification whenever we post our post on our Facebook page.
And can I just clarify, Facebook says in their ruling that if you like and follow a page, that you're supposed to receive a notification whenever we drop content. What's the purpose of them following and liking a page? That's the purpose of them following and liking a branding page, because they're going to see and view your content. So it's not fair for Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg to think that they can dictate to people and tell people what they can and cannot see in their news feed. I thought this was a platform for all ideas.
Thank you. I think all of our witnesses have had very valuable testimony, and I agree with a great deal of it, Mr. Soka. I agree with you. We should not have a standard set for the internet like we used to have for broadcast media. Mr. Waldman, Professor Waldman, I agree with you that these companies are going to do this. They're going to be expected to do it. But I'm most fascinated by Mr. Chavern's testimony, and I want to get into the issue of what we do about it when people are wronged, like Ms. Hardaway and Ms. Richardson have been wronged. Right now, citizens can hold newspapers and other media groups legally accountable if they do certain things in their newspaper, whether it's publishing false information, showing indecent content, they use materials or photos they're not authorized or did not pay to use, and so on. Tech platforms are currently making in-depth decisions, like newspapers make, about what information users receive and how they receive it, often driven by financial and other unknown motives. So Mr. Zuckerberg himself has repeatedly said that his platform is responsible for the content that they host. Should the tech platforms be subject to the same content regulations and civil penalties and libel and slander that those who produce the content are responsible for?
Well, thank you very much. I think we all have to acknowledge that these are novel businesses, right? People say, are they media companies, are they publishers? They're really attention businesses. They want more of your attention, and they will feed information to get more of that attention. I think we all have to be concerned about paths that would lead to them having more overt control over content or being in the content businesses. I'm not sure I'm excited about.
How do we avoid that?
Well, I think we can start by making them responsible for the power and decisions they have today.
And how do we do that?
We'll start by the algorithms, as we say, these rules that they determine. They sort of talk broadly about them, but nobody really knows what's in them. They are secret rules, and if you have secret rules, you don't get the benefit of the doubt. I think they have to start by being much more transparent about their decision-making and actually having enforceable standards about that decision-making, about things like fairness and openness. That's the first place to start, because that's what they do today, and you have to be responsible for what they can do today, and they're really not. They have rules that nobody knows what they are. They have impacts that we can only vaguely tease out. They have to be responsible for their moderation of their
So should that come about by legislative action or by judicial decisions based upon breach of contract or libel or slander or?
I think, I mean, frankly, there are many ways to get there, but we're going to keep having hearings like this as long as nobody knows how the secret rules are being applied, right? If you have secret rules, you're always not going to get the benefit of the doubt. And we're going to have to, either through legislation or through their own actions, or could be other options, get to where there's much more transparency about their decision making. They're responsible for prioritizing quality content that is indicators of trust and not other kinds of content, and ultimately answerable for these decisions they make, because currently, right now, they're not. I mean, we're just sort of guessing about what their algorithms do.
Thank you. Mr. Nadler.
Let me begin by clearing up one important item. The central thesis of this hearing seems to be that social media companies use complex algorithms to suppress conservative voices on the internet. Set aside for the moment whether or not you approve of filtering practices and content moderation generally. Mr. Waldman, yes or no? Is there any compelling evidence whatsoever to support the notion that Facebook, Twitter, or Google intentionally suppress conservative content on their platforms?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Chavin, I hear your concerns about the effect of content filtering on the news media, but yes or no? Do you have any evidence that Facebook, Twitter, or Google intentionally suppress conservative content?
We have not looked at, I have not analyzed that.
The answer is no.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Soka, you represent an organization that represents a conservative point of view. Yes or no? Do you have any evidence that Facebook, Twitter, or Google intentionally suppress conservative voices on the internet in particular?
No, Congressman.
No. Thank you. Absent any evidence on this front, let's move on. I would like this panel's help with the subject matter this committee should be addressing today. Mr. Waldman, earlier this week, we met with Cambridge Analytica whistleblower Christopher Wiley. According to Mr. Wiley, SCL Group, a British company acting under the name Cambridge Analytica in the United States, operated as what Steve Bannon called a propaganda machine in the service of Mr. Bannon, the Mercer family, and eventually candidate Donald Trump. That propaganda was built in large part on information that Cambridge Analytica misappropriated from millions of Facebook users. We should be holding a hearing on this topic, but the majority didn't even send staff to listen to Mr. Wiley's testimony when we had him the other day. Mr. Waldman, what does Cambridge Analytica tell us about Facebook's privacy policies, and why should this committee prioritize those issues?
Cambridge Analytica's ability to access 87 million, information on 87 million shows us that Facebook doesn't really care about our privacy. What allowed Cambridge Analytica to access that information was that the quiz, the psychological quiz, allowed the designer to scrape information through Facebook's API. And the only reason why that exact situation, the exact Cambridge Analytica situation, can't reoccur today is because Facebook decided to just fix that and just stop third-party apps from allowing them to scrape information that way. So that shows us that we are entirely at the mercy of Facebook's good graces to decide if they're going to allow this or if they're not going to. So in this situation, we are allowing Facebook to exist in kind of a regulatory void, as I mentioned, that leaves our data insecure.
Thank you. And what precautions, policies, or security protocols can Facebook and other social media giants use or require to prevent unauthorized third parties acquiring user data for commercial, political, and nefarious purposes?
Well, I think we have to start at Facebook actually enforcing its rules. We learned shortly after the Cambridge Analytica fiasco that Facebook has an internal procedure where people are supposed to check up on the data usage of third-party applications. There's an entire team about it. One of the former employees wrote an op-ed, I believe in the Washington Post, that described, yeah, this was my job, but I was told that I really shouldn't be walking through all the steps that I'm supposed to. So all they did was call someone up and say, hey, are you using this data in the wrong way? And then never followed up. So at first, we have to make sure that Facebook is engaging the tools that they have in order to make sure that this data isn't being used improperly.
Thank you. Now, looking back at the election in 2016, the Russian disinformation campaign may have reached over 126 million Facebook users, accounted for more than 1,000 videos on YouTube, and included hundreds of thousands of messages and posts on Twitter. That accounts just for the 3 companies that were invited here today, and whom I suspect would have come had Republicans shown that they take this subject matter seriously. Mr. Waldman, the Russian company indicted by the Special Counsel's Office for a conspiracy to defraud the United States, the conspiracy at the heart of the Special Counsel's work, spent an estimated $100,000 on Facebook ads. What information does this committee need from Facebook in order to determine the impact and reach of that ad buy? Quickly, if you could, because my time is running out.
Sure. We need what money was spent, where the money came from, what companies were involved and what banks were involved, the way they were targeted, the algorithms used, and how that information was processed.
Okay. I have one final question of a more general nature, again to Professor Waldman. Everybody here, Mr. Soka, Professor Waldman, Mr. Chapman, has said there's no evidence that they've seen that Facebook intentionally discriminated against conservative views. But let's assume they had. Let's assume they had. Facebook is a private company. Sinclair discriminates against liberal views. Is there any difference in principle? Should we permit? Let's assume we decide that Facebook was completely discriminating against liberals or against conservatives. Should we do anything about that?
There's an editorial...
And the same question for Sinclair, for example, or
Fox.
Fox.
There's an editorial role here. That's what companies that host content do. If they embed those particular values into their design, I'm not sure that it is this Congress's or this committee's role to say that Facebook has to have X amount of voices from the conservative side and X amount of voices from the liberal side.
Congressman, I think I've made clear that I think the fairness doctrine in whatever context is a terrible idea. The government has no business policing speech, period. But I do want to emphasize, Congressman Blackburn noted earlier that there are certain rules on the books about broadcast speech. Those rules have survived scrutiny only because the Supreme Court has refused to grant full First Amendment rights to broadcasters. I think that decision, Red Lion from 1969, is outdated. But I just want to emphasize that we run into a real danger in these discussions of people saying, well, why can't we have a certain regulation that exists for broadcasting? Why can't we have that for the internet or newspapers? And the answer is very clear, because the internet, newspapers, and all other media other than broadcasting are fully protected by the First Amendment. Those rules would never survive First Amendment challenges if brought in court when applied to the internet.
Thank you. My time has expired.